My name is Julie Martin, and I'm currently the acting director of Experiments in Art and Technology, E.A.T. When E.A.T. started, when Billy and Fred Waldhauer, the engineers, and Bob Whitman and Bob Rauschenberg sort of decided during the preparations for 9 evenings that let's do an organization that could continue this work. The collaborations that were going on between the artists and engineers for the 9 evenings performances seemed to be so fruitful and were, resulting in things that worked and systems that were going to work in the theater, that let's try to spread this out. I looking at E.A.T. now, I realize how much it was of its time. It was really an organization of the 60s, like SDS, Students for Democratic Society, like the civil rights movement in a sense, or the anti-war movement, although it wasn't political in that sense, but it participated in this idea that the individual could make changes in society. The idea that individual agency was important. And so this idea that the individual artists and engineers working together could affect the technology in ways that could I think in Rauschenberg's aims, avoid the waste of a cultural revolution. In a way, it was ahead of its time. You were dealing with institutional structures that had their own structure and their own, reward system or modes of operating. And so somehow to try to introduce artists, or even introduce interdisciplinary projects into these structures was very difficult. One of the things about the 60s is the artists were interested in science. With the moonshot and the development of technology, they began to be more interested in science, and many of them, their favorite magazine was Scientific American, which not only dealt with these subjects but had really beautiful diagrams. So there was this growing interest among artists in how the technology was developing. And also what's interesting is this idea about the collaboration. It took off beyond our efforts, or people responded to it. And so artists and engineers in different places in the US, some places we knew people and maybe they knew us, but they wanted to do their own group. They wanted to begin to put local artists together with local engineers. And so we call them local groups, grew up around the country, and some in Sweden, one in Holland and Paris. And we just said, yeah, go for it. Really, Seattle in the Northwest, where Boeing was, there was a very active group. LA there was a very active, San Francisco, Cleveland, Philadelphia. So what's interesting, it was kind of an idea whose time had come. Well, 68, Pontus Hultén, who's head of Moderna Museet in Stockholm, was going to do a show for MoMA called The Machine is Seen at the End of the Mechanical Age, which actually, thinking about that now, in 68 was pretty amazing where Pontus got that idea. It's really prescient in terms of, it was really just the beginning of computers, but somehow he was clued in. And then he asked Billy and E.A.T. to find artists who were more contemporary artists, using technology in a more contemporary way than the sort of historical constructivist Bauhaus, Tingley, these kind of people. Writings that Billy and Bob Rauschenberg did, it was more theoretical. It was the idea that the artist could enlarge the engineer, but the engineer began to work in another area outside of his very narrow lab, and they worked in an area that was more focused on human individual concerns, individual interests, and that this could inspire the engineer to be a better engineer, and maybe and that the technology could be more focused on the individual. The important thing is that you're talking about people with respecting the expertise of the individuals who collaborate.